My neighbor demanded I give up my backyard for her daughter's wedding, so I gave her a reality check instead. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of sun-drenched day that makes you forget the world has any sharp edges. I was in my garden, kneeling in the dirt, my fingers deep in the cool soil, transplanting a row of lavender that my grandmother had given me. The air smelled of damp earth and sweet blossoms, and I could hear my son, Leo, laughing as he played with his toys on the porch. It was a perfect moment, the kind you try to bottle up. Then I felt a shadow fall over me, cold and deliberate, cutting off the warmth of the sun. I looked up, my eyes adjusting to the glare, and saw her standing at the edge of my property. The serene quiet of my afternoon was about to be shattered by someone who felt the world, and everything in it belonged to her. My name is Andrea, and I live in a modest, craftsman-style house on a tree-lined street in a suburb that prides itself on its quiet charm. It's not a fancy neighborhood, but it's mine. I bought it 5 years ago, a few years after my divorce. It was a fixer-upper, a project that consumed my weekends and my savings, but it was my sanctuary. Every piece of peeling wallpaper I stripped, every creaky floorboard I sanded, every garden I planted, it was all a part of rebuilding my life. I chose this place specifically because of the generous backyard. It's a large, flat expanse of green, bordered by an old, weathered fence on one side and my own wildflower garden on the other. It's where I drink my coffee in the morning, where I read my books in the hammock I strung up between 2 oak trees, and where my son, Leo, has grown from a toddler taking his first steps to a curious 7-year-old who loves chasing fireflies at dusk. My life, post-divorce, has been about cultivating peace, and my backyard was the epicenter of that tranquility. My next-door neighbor, a woman I'll call Margaret, had always been a source of friction. She and her husband, a quiet man who I rarely saw, had lived in their sprawling, modern 2-story house for as long as I'd been here. Their home was a monument to suburban ambition, with a pristine lawn, a 3-car garage, and a flagstone patio that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Margaret, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp bob of silver hair and a permanent expression of mild disdain, ran the neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a role she wielded like a weapon. She had a unique talent for making you feel like you were trespassing on your own property. There had always been small, passive-aggressive clashes. She once complained that the height of my sunflowers was a visual obstruction to her view. She sent a formal letter complete with a HOA header demanding I remove a bird feeder because it was attracting undesirable wildlife. I'd ignored most of it, or complied just enough to get her off my back, choosing my battles for the sake of my own sanity. I knew the kind of person she was. She was the type who measured her own worth by the standards of others, and felt the need to impose those standards on everyone around her. Her world was small and easily threatened. The inciting incident arrived on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in early October. I was in the garden, a perfect moment of solitude. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of the last of the summer roses and the promise of fall. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees. I was at peace. Then the sun vanished. I looked up to see Margaret, not standing at my fence, but walking right into my yard, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. She wore a crisp white blouse and tailored trousers, a stark contrast to my jeans and gardening gloves. A flicker of annoyance, which I quickly tamped down, flared in my chest. She didn't have a friendly hello or how are you on her lips. Instead, her eyes were scanning my property as if she were appraising it. "Andrea," she said, her voice a clipped, formal tone that was always a beat away from a reprimand. "I need to talk to you about something important." I brushed the dirt off my knees and stood up, matching her gaze. I wasn't about to be intimidated in my own backyard. "What can I do for you, Margaret?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to the wooden fence that separated our properties and gave it a firm push, testing its stability. My fence. The fence I had meticulously stained and repaired myself. "I noticed this is getting a bit tired," she stated, turning back to me. "It's old and frankly, it's an eyesore. It detracts from the aesthetic of the entire block. We'll need to take it down and put up a proper one." I blinked, confused. "Excuse me? I just stained it last spring. It's perfectly fine." "It's not about fine, Andrea. It's about standards," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You see, my daughter Vanessa is getting married next month. We're having a large reception here at my house. The guest list is nearly 200 people." It felt like a non sequitur. What did her daughter's wedding have to do with my fence? A horrible feeling started to curl in my stomach, a cold dread that told me I wasn't going to like where this was heading. "That sounds lovely," I said, trying to maintain the social pleasantries. "Congratulations to her, but I'm not sure what that has to do with my fence." "Well, the party is going to be quite large, and we'll need the extra space," Margaret explained, her tone as if she were stating an irrefutable fact. "My backyard is lovely, but for the cocktail hour, we're going to need more room for the guests to mingle. We've decided to open up the 2 yards. Have a seamless flow from one property to the other. I need you to take down your fence." My heart started to pound. not from anger, but from the sheer absurdity of what she was saying. It was like she was speaking a foreign language where the word mine didn't exist. Take down my fence? Margaret, this is my property. I'm not taking down my fence so you can have a bigger garden party for your daughter. She sighed, a theatrical puff of air, as if I were the unreasonable one. Vanessa's wedding is the most important event of the year. It's not just a garden party. It's a social event of considerable significance. We need the space. It's only for one evening. You can simply have the fence put back up the next day. It's a minor inconvenience for you, but it would be everything for us. The audacity was staggering. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. The answer is no, Margaret. You can't just waltz onto my property and demand I dismantle it for your convenience. This is my home, my son's home. She looked at me as if I hadn't spoken, as if my words were just background noise. I'm sure we can come to an agreement, she said, a predatory smile playing on her lips. I've already spoken to the HOA board, and they're supportive of our endeavor to improve the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. A few of them suggested that perhaps you'd be more agreeable if we discussed it as a community issue. They're very concerned about appearances. The threat was barely veiled. She was using her influence with the HOA as a weapon to bully me into submission. The board, which she had handpicked and dominated for years, would back her up on anything. I was just a single mother and a fixer-upper trying to keep up. She saw me as the weak link, and she was using a community organization to push me. I don't care what the HOA thinks about my fence. It's my property, and the answer is no, I repeated, my voice hardening. I could feel the fight-or-flight response kicking in. Every instinct telling me to stand my ground. You need to leave now, Margaret. Instead of leaving, she took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, Andrea, I am prepared to be generous. There are a lot of people on this block who want to see you do the right thing. I can make the next few years of your life very pleasant, or I can make them a bureaucratic nightmare. It's your choice. Just let me have the yard for the wedding, and this all goes away. She smiled, a cold, hard expression. I'll send someone over tomorrow to start the work. We can discuss the fence removal details then. She turned on her heel and strode back towards her house, her heels clicking a sharp final rhythm on the grass. I stood frozen in my garden. The scent of lavender that had been so soothing moments before now felt cloying. My perfectly peaceful Tuesday afternoon had just been painted in stark, threatening colors. The choice she had laid before me was a diabolical one. Give in to her outrageous demand or face a personal war. The quiet, pleasant life I had fought so hard to rebuild was suddenly under attack, and it was coming from the one person who seemed to have all the local power. I looked over at Leo, still playing peacefully on the porch, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just blown in. I knew then that I couldn't just let this go. I had to do something. The first thing I did was dig out the paperwork from when I bought the house. I found the property survey, the deed, and the detailed plot map that clearly showed the boundary lines. My fence wasn't just a decorative feature. It was a legal demarcation of my property. I spent the morning making copies of everything, organizing them in a neat folder. I wanted to be prepared for whatever Margaret threw at me. I knew she would try to use the Homeowners Association as a weapon, so I decided to get ahead of that. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop and spent the next hour reading through every single page. What I found was both reassuring and infuriating. The bylaws were clear about property maintenance and aesthetic guidelines, but there was absolutely nothing that gave the board or any individual the authority to demand a property owner remove a fence that was in good repair and within code. Margaret's threat had been hollow, a bluff designed to intimidate me. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a renewed sense of confidence. I typed up a polite but firm email to the HOA board, attaching my property survey and the relevant sections of the bylaws. I explained the situation without being accusatory, simply stating that I would not be removing my fence and that I expected the board to respect my property rights. I sent the email and felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't a victory, but it was a countermove. I spent the rest of the day trying to get back to normal, taking Leo to soccer practice and running errands. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was planning her next move. She wasn't the type to give up easily. I was right. The following morning, I woke up to find a letter taped to my front door. It was an official-looking document, complete with the HOA letterhead. My heart sank as I unfolded it. The letter was a formal notice of a violation. It claimed that my fence was in disrepair, that it posed a safety hazard, and that I had 30 days to bring it up to code or face fines and potential legal action. The irony was almost laughable. My fence was solid. It was in far better condition than most of the fences in the neighborhood. Margaret had clearly manufactured this complaint. She had likely taken photos of the fence from an unflattering angle, or even staged some damage to make it look worse than it was. I felt the familiar heat of anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew this was a game to her, and I wasn't going to lose by reacting emotionally. I called a friend of mine, a lawyer named Diane, who I'd known since college. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, And when I was finished, she let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said. "She's got some nerve." But Andrea, you have the law on your side. The HOA can't just make up violations. They have to provide proof. And if they try to fine you, you can appeal. Do you have photos of your fence? Recent ones? I do, I said, feeling a wave of gratitude. I take pictures of the garden all the time. I have some from just last week. Perfect, Diane said. Send me everything you have. The survey, the bylaws, the violation notice, and the photos. I'll draft a response letter for you. We'll call their bluff. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a retraction of the violation notice. The board claimed it had been a misunderstanding, that the complaint had been filed by an anonymous resident and they had been forced to investigate. They apologized for any inconvenience and assured me that my fence was in full compliance. I knew Margaret was behind it, but I also knew she was furious. Her little scheme had backfired. For a week, things were quiet. I thought maybe Margaret had finally realized she couldn't bully me. I let myself relax, even feeling a tiny bit of triumph. But I should have known better. A woman like Margaret doesn't accept defeat gracefully. She waits for the right moment to strike back. That moment came on a Saturday afternoon when I was in the backyard with Leo. We were having a picnic, just the two of us, enjoying the unusually warm weather. The leaves were starting to turn, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds and distant lawnmowers. I was spreading a blanket on the grass, humming a song, when I heard a car pull into Margaret's driveway. A sleek black SUV parked on her side of the fence, and a man in a suit got out. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a professional demeanor. He walked to Margaret's front door and was led inside. I couldn't see much from my angle, but something about the encounter made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But when I looked over at my fence, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A small, unobtrusive metal stake had been driven into the ground right next to my fence post. It was partially hidden by the overgrown grass. I had never seen it before. I walked over to inspect it, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone and took a photo, sending it to Diane with a message. "What is this?" She responded within minutes. "That's a survey marker, Andrea. It's used to mark property lines. Did you hire a surveyor?" "No," I typed back. "I didn't." Diane called me immediately, her voice tight with concern. "Andrea, I think she's trying to make a claim on your property. She might be trying to claim adverse possession or something. This is serious. I'd bet she hired a surveyor to show that your fence is encroaching on her land, even if it's only by a few inches. She's building a case to force you to move your fence." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Margaret wasn't just trying to intimidate me. She was trying to systematically dismantle my property rights. She was playing a long game. I felt a cold fury settle in my bones, the kind that comes when you realize someone is actively trying to destroy your life. I looked over at Leo, who was happily eating his sandwich, blissfully unaware that the world was closing in around us. I couldn't let her win, but I also couldn't fight her alone. I needed evidence, and I needed help. I needed to know exactly what Margaret was planning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the survey marker, the suit-clad man, and the carefully constructed lies Margaret had already told. I decided I had to get more information. The next morning, I woke up early and made a plan. I knew Margaret had a habit of taking morning walks around the neighborhood, often stopping to gossip with other residents. I decided to follow her, to see if I could overhear anything useful. It felt a little ridiculous, like something out of a spy movie, but I was out of options. I grabbed my coffee and a pair of binoculars I used for birdwatching, and I positioned myself in my living room, peeking through the curtains, watching her front door. At 8 o'clock, Margaret emerged. She was dressed in her usual crisp athletic wear, and she set off down the street with a determined stride. I waited a minute and then slipped out my back door, cutting through the alley to avoid being seen. I kept a careful distance, ducking behind trees and parked cars whenever she looked back. She walked for about 10 minutes before stopping at a house 2 blocks over. It was the home of a woman I knew only as Patricia, a retired school teacher who was one of Margaret's closest allies on the HOA board. I crept closer, hiding behind a large evergreen bush in Patricia's front yard. Through the open window, I could hear Margaret's voice, sharp and triumphant. "The surveyor confirmed it," she was saying. "Her fence is 3 inches over the property line. It's a small detail, but it's enough. I've already contacted my lawyer. We'll serve her with papers next week. Once the fence is legally declared a trespass, she'll have no choice but to remove it. And then I'll have the space I need. Vanessa's wedding will be perfect." I stood frozen behind the bush, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Margaret wasn't just planning to inconvenience me. She was planning to steal my land, inch by inch, using legal loopholes and her connections to force me out. The fight had just escalated far beyond a simple disagreement over a garden party. This was now a war for my home, and I had to decide how far I was willing to go to protect it. I crept away from Patricia's house as quietly as I had arrived, my mind racing with possibilities. The walk back to my home felt surreal. like I was moving through a fog. Every step I took, I replayed Margaret's words. Her fence is 3 inches over the property line. 3 inches. She was willing to destroy my life over 3 inches of land. I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer pettiness of it all. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about control. Margaret couldn't stand the idea that there was a single square foot of this neighborhood that she didn't have dominion over. My home, my little sanctuary, was an affront to her need for order. I spent the rest of the day gathering my thoughts and formulating a plan. I called Diane and told her everything I had overheard. She was silent for a long moment, and I could hear her keyboard clicking in the background. Okay, she said finally. Here's what we're going to do. First, we need to verify that surveyor's findings. I can hire an independent surveyor to come out and remeasure the property lines. If Margaret's survey is inaccurate, we can use that to discredit her claim. Second, I want you to document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every email. Create a timeline. We need to build a case that shows a pattern of harassment. What about the wedding? I asked. She's still planning to use my yard. Let her plan, Diane said, a hint of steel in her voice. The wedding is in a few weeks, right? We have time. Let her think she's won. The more she overreaches, the more evidence we have against her. It was a risky strategy, but I trusted Diane. She had never steered me wrong before. I spent the next week documenting everything. I created a detailed log of every interaction with Margaret, complete with dates and times. I printed out all the emails and letters. I took new photos of my fence from every angle, highlighting its excellent condition. I even went through my old photos and found shots of the fence from the day I bought the house, proving it had been in the same position for years. The independent surveyor Diane hired came out on a Thursday morning. He was a no-nonsense man named Robert, who arrived with a clipboard, a transit, and a crew of 2 assistants. He spent hours measuring, taking readings, and double-checking his calculations. He was meticulous, almost to the point of obsession. When he was finally done, he walked up to me with a grim expression on his face. My heart sank. Your fence is exactly where it's supposed to be, he said. The property line is clearly marked on the county records. I found no evidence of encroachment. Whoever did that other survey either made a mistake or deliberately misread the measurements. The marker they placed is actually a few inches on your side of the line, not theirs. In fact, if anything, they might be encroaching on your land. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. Can you put that in writing? I asked. Already did, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. This is the official survey report. It's certified and notarized. You can take this to a judge if you need to. I practically floated back inside the house. I had the ammunition I needed, but I knew that simply having the survey report wasn't enough. I needed to confront Margaret in a way that left her no room to maneuver. I thought about her words at Patricia's house, the way she had boasted about having the legal upper hand. She was so confident, so sure of her victory. I decided to let her keep that confidence for a little while longer. I wanted her to plan her big reveal, to savor her imagined triumph. Then, I would dismantle it all. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense. I went about my daily routine, taking Leo to school, working from home, tending to my garden. I saw Margaret occasionally, and each time she gave me a smug, knowing smile that made my blood boil. She was convinced she had won. I let her believe it. I even played along a little, avoiding eye contact and acting subdued. I wanted her to be so blinded by her own arrogance that she wouldn't see the counterpunch coming. The day of the wedding arrived on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun cast a warm golden light over everything. I could hear the commotion from Margaret's backyard, the chatter of caterers, the clink of glasses, the sound of a string quartet tuning up. I watched from my kitchen window as guests began to arrive, dressed in their finest attire. Margaret was in her element, flitting from group to group, basking in the attention. Vanessa, her daughter, looked beautiful in a flowing white gown, but even from a distance, I could see the stress in her eyes. She was a pawn in her mother's game, and I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. I waited until the reception was in full swing. The music was playing, people were dancing, and Margaret was holding court at the center of it all. That's when I made my move. I had arranged for a delivery service to bring a large package to my address. The delivery driver, a young man named Carlos, was a friend of a friend who owed me a favor. He arrived just as the cocktail hour was winding down, pulling his truck up to the curb in front of my house. He unloaded a massive, custom-made sign and set it up in my backyard, right against the fence where Margaret's guests could see it. The sign was elegant, professionally printed on weatherproof material. It read, "Welcome to Andrea's Garden. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "This property line has been legally surveyed and certified. Any attempt to encroach will be met with legal action." I had also set up a small table with refreshments and a sign that said, "Enjoy the view from a respectful distance." The reaction was immediate. A murmur rippled through the crowd as guests turned to read the sign. I saw Margaret's face go from confusion to shock to a deep, ugly red. She marched across her lawn, her heels sinking into the grass, her eyes blazing with fury. She looked like a cartoon villain about to explode. I was standing on my side of the fence, calm and collected, holding my copy of the certified survey report. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the yard. "What have you done?" I smiled, a genuine smile that I had been holding in for weeks. "I'm simply protecting my property, Margaret. You made it quite clear that you intended to take it from me. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." She looked at the sign, then at me, then at her guests, who were now staring openly. The music had faltered, and the string quartet had stopped playing. All eyes were on us. Margaret sputtered, trying to find words. "You can't do this. This is my daughter's wedding. You've ruined everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said, my voice steady. "I'm simply asserting my rights. You're the one who tried to steal my property, who lied to the HOA, who hired a crooked surveyor to make a false claim. I have the proof right here." I held up the survey report. "If you'd like to discuss this further, you can do so through my lawyer, Diane. She'll be in touch." Margaret looked like she was going to have a heart attack. Her face was so red it was almost purple. But before she could say anything else, Vanessa stepped forward. She had tears in her eyes, but her voice was clear and firm. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Vanessa asked. "Did you really try to take her yard?" Margaret's composure crumbled. "It's not what it sounds like, sweetheart. I just wanted it to be perfect for you. By stealing someone else's property?" Vanessa's voice was incredulous. She turned to me, her expression apologetic. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. This is horrifying." I nodded, feeling a genuine pang of sympathy for the young woman. "It's not your fault, Vanessa. This is between me and your mother. The wedding didn't end, but the atmosphere was irrevocably shattered. Guests started leaving, and I heard whispers and murmurs as they passed. Margaret's carefully constructed reputation had been demolished in a single afternoon. She retreated into her house, but I knew this wasn't over. She would try to fight back, to spin the narrative, to find some way to retaliate, but I was ready for her. I had the evidence, the legal support, and the will to see this through. Over the next few weeks, Margaret's influence in the neighborhood crumbled. Several HOA board members resigned in protest of her actions, and a new election was held. The new board was more reasonable and fair. Margaret's attempts to take legal action against me were dismissed by the courts, thanks to the certified survey report. She was forced to pay my legal fees, which I donated to a local community garden project. In the end, Margaret and her husband sold their house and moved away. I heard they went to a retirement community in Florida, which seemed fitting. Vanessa sent me a handwritten letter, apologizing for her mother's behavior and thanking me for not letting it ruin her wedding. She and her new husband had decided to move to a different city, far from Margaret's influence. My backyard returned to its peaceful state. The lavender bloomed, Leo chased fireflies, and I sipped my morning coffee in the hammock, watching the sun rise over the trees. I had won, but more importantly, I had stood up for myself. I had protected my home and my son's sense of security. Margaret's departure left a void, but it was a welcome one. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer. People smiled more. The HOA stopped sending passive-aggressive letters. The community thrived, unburdened by Margaret's tyranny. I learned a valuable lesson through it all. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the truth. When people try to tear you down, the best response is to stand your ground, gather your evidence, and refuse to be intimidated. Margaret thought she could bully me into submission, but she underestimated the strength of a woman who had already rebuilt her life once. I had weathered a divorce, a house renovation, and the challenges of single motherhood. A petty neighbor with a grudge was nothing compared to that. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again. My story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of boundaries, and the peace that comes when you finally stop letting other people define your world.